Carmen, I think thank you so much for agreeing to come on board and put together this really interesting presentation. We are super excited to be hosting you here for the Against All Odds Startup Summit APAC edition. I will let you take it forward from here without further ado to talk about the $1 billion game plan for Southeast Asia.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks on us for doing the screen share for me. Apologies that we do have a technical glitch. Experience is less than perfect. But in any case, happy to share with you on the $1 billion game plan for Southeast Asia. So we can go to the next slide. So I will start. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So we'll start with talking a little bit about what Vertex is and who we are. We are actually quite a global fund comprising of 4 early stage funds, 2 of which has got global mandate. So you will see the ones that are grayed out, 1 in healthcare and 1 in growth. For the Southeast Asia and India fund, which I belong to, we focus on, of course, this region, and focus is on consumer internet, fintech, and enterprise solution. Next. So next. So I'll be sharing on the $1 billion game plan and why I remain extremely optimistic about this region that we live in despite COVID. Next slide. 2020 has been a year where the Southeast Asia region was subject to US, China, and if at all, it had worsened since the start of 2018. GDP for this region has continued to decline. But we sense that this region is benefiting from the trade tensions. And at a recent ASEAN briefing, it noted that when factories started shutting down in China, MNCs realized that they needed to have a second source. And so businessmen from like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan started to look into Southeast Asia as an alternative place for their manufacturing activities. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Prior to COVID, we were seeing a good growth trajectory for ASEAN, and we were actually the 6th largest economy in the world. Next slide. But that has kind of changed with this year. In this year, the regional economy is shrinking due to COVID-19, and this is actually a double whammy given that from the effect of the trade war. And adding COVID to trade war, what happens is that the GDP effect became a negative 6.7% for ASEAN. So what do we learn from here? We learned that the region has to be prepared and resilient in VUCA environment. We should learn to build and cooperate with our ASEAN neighbors. And more importantly, we must make sure that our SMEs are pulled along in this whole journey. Next slide. So at the next slide, you will see that ASEAN actually has the 3rd largest population with 660 million people and counting. We account for 8.3% of the world population, and more than half are actually under 30 years old. This means that the region is actually in a very good place to see potential growth, both in population and spending patterns. And in fact, the growth rate in ASEAN is higher than that of the US, UK, and China. Yes, we produce more babies than China. Next. So with high internet penetration and good internet speed, this means that Southeast Asians are better able to access information on the go, and we can respond or react to what we see almost instantaneously. And we spend 30% of our waking hours on social media. And riding on the digital infrastructure is our desire to improve ourselves, and the region has this mindset that with better education, one can get better opportunities, and hence it helps to raise our economic standing. And as a region, we are pretty highly literate, and we're fairly decent when it comes to the net enrollment rate. Next slide. So McKinsey has projected that the number of consuming households will double to 125 million by 2025. And IMF, through its World Economic Outlook report, projected that recovery should start in 2021. And Asia is expected to grow at 6%. So projecting this forward, when GDP grows, gets better, we should expect to see a reduction in poverty, an improved life expectancy, investment in technology, and hence better skill set and employability, and therefore a higher standard of living. And actually, majority of the Southeast Asian consumers feel that they are already financially better off than 5 years ago, and majority of them are able to spend comfortably. Next. In a separate World Economic Forum report, it shows that the region is actually seeing an increase of 38 million households entering into the upper middle and high income groups. And all this spells opportunity to target them as consumers. Next slide. So with this backdrop in mind, and with more than half of our population being millennials and centennials, we should spend more time knowing more about our MZs. We can stay on this slide. Diving deeper into the allocation of time, MZs spend far much more time on the internet with their parents or aunts and uncles. And in fact, on a daily basis, they spend double the time on the internet compared with their European counterpart. And when we think that it is almost impossible to spend so much time on the digital world, we wake up to realize that Gen Zs spend significantly more time on YouTube, Snapchat than their millennials. The social media space certainly remains an effective channel to reach them, but the messaging will have to be somewhat nuanced, as you will see in the next slide. So next, 63% of millennials spend half an hour on Facebook, while 56% of Gen Zs spend the same amount of time on IG. Same but not the same, under the same Facebook group but yet slightly different. The Gen Zs are the graduating class this year, but unlike generations before them, they will celebrate virtually. And they step into a world with no job certainty, and while they love experiences, realities require them to be more cautious of money. And even though they prefer working in organizations that speak and share their values, circumstances will force them to work in any environment or any jobs that come their way. Next. And while the data of the millennials, this is the data of millennials from India, I believe the split of revenue or of wallet will represent that of the ASEAN millennials as well. Entertainment will include Netflix experiences, but you'll be surprised that View, with 14 million monthly active users, is actually much more popular than Netflix. And then when it comes to the games industry report shows that sales across 50 markets rose by 63%. We know that consumption of digital entertainment escalates during downturn, and this is proven to be the case again as titles launched during the pandemic, such as Doom Eternal and Animal Crossing, both showed breaking sales records. Online shopping, despite COVID-19, has also seen regular participation from the millennials and Gen Zs. And now that eating out and traveling is muted, electronic sales has become a key area to spend on. And this is no surprise given that millennials and the Gen Zs are very much involved in the e-games arena. And it is projected that by 2030, more than half the Gen Zs will spend $30 a month on online shopping. Next. So here we see the values that drive the MZs. Authentic products. More than 60% of the MZs consider fake goods a concern when it comes to shopping online. They pay high attention to it and they rather not buy than to buy fake. They will not be seen with fake. They value brands that are socially conscious, and this contributes to the well-being of the environment at large. Instagrammability is important for them. They are very receptive to leaving footprints in the social media world, but they just want it to be very authentic, and it talks about their own life accounts. And convenience. Oh, you won't believe the amount of convenience and how convenience is so very important to them. Next. So when we expand on their values, the MZs care about the environment much more than the Gen X and the Boomers. You'll notice that only 9% of Gen Zs are willing to pay more. But then again, if you consider that Gen Zs are only starting to work now and most of them are still in school, hence the 9% is totally expected. But we do expect to see that they will step forward and spend more as they penetrate the working world. Next. MZs select their influencers based on how much they can relate to these influencers, who must be authentic. So you will look at all the percentages that is reflected. It speaks over and over again about how influencers need to be authentic, need to be real, and they do not want to be sold on. Next slide. So then where exactly will the opportunities be? Next. With the C word, COVID, the world came to a standstill and our GDP forecasts were all revised downwards. During this period, we witnessed an ugly side of life, from empty shelves in supermarkets, hoarding behavior to fights over toilet paper. We have become more nervous when someone coughs among us, and we became clean freaks. How many times have we been sanitizing our hands today? And we are also a much more quieter nation, given that in Singapore we were discouraged from speaking in public communes. But on a positive note, there were more efforts in mentoring, appreciating frontline workers. We enjoyed virtual choirs, and we see people take the initiative to check in with other neighbors and also delivering free food. So with work from home being the norm for likely the rest of the year, we see a new economy, the homebody economy, which will spell business opportunity. But before we speak about opportunities, let's look at what are some of the major discomforts that our government is facing. Next slide. So, to respond to the shock in our economies, different governments have launched its versions of economic stimulus programs, such as extending favorable loans to SMEs, salary subsidies, and also to defer obligations such as taxes, all in the name of providing buffer to cushion our companies, and mainly SMEs, so as to extend their runway. And meanwhile, GDP projections continue to look very uncertain. Next slide. So why are SMEs a concern for us? That's because they form the backbone of our economy and they employ the bulk of our people. SMEs operate on very, very thin buffer, and many have less than 6 months of cash runway. They are often too laden with too many operational challenges to plan for strategic growth and adoption of technology. And with a pandemic of this nature, SMEs can actually be left behind, and as a result, many lives will be impacted should the SMEs decide to shut their doors. Next. So COVID has actually impacted businesses in varying degrees. Some sectors have thrived, but many have also suffered. Other than the perennial challenge of trying to find working capital, SMEs also have to cope with having weaker technology compared to large corporations. And with work from home being the norm, their IT systems will be further stressed, not to mention very vulnerable to cyber attacks. And MNCs will focus on developing R&D or using their monies better to do research for the futures. But with very little cash buffer, SMEs will not even be thinking about R&D. And this is also a time for startups to think outside the box and see where innovation can be found and evaluate opportunities where there's available assets. So a survey on SME competitiveness outlook showed that actually 42% or more than 40% of SMEs plan to reduce headcount. Once gone, this talent will not be available for hire in future, as they would have moved on to do other things. So will there be ways to tap into this potentially big and available talent pool? And will this be a possible business opportunity? We'll look at it more. Next. So lest we worry that there are no investors for innovative startups, that is not the case. You can see that there are market yields that were done during this period. And however, not to be disheartened, startups such as Partypose, Mystify, and Transcelestial, they all raised relatively sizable amounts during the COVID period. So it is not just the e-commerce and fintech deals that are funded, although they do account for quite a sizable chunk of the Q2 funding. VCs in Southeast Asia have raised more than $1.3 billion in the first quarter of 2020, and this will be funds that is ready for deployment. The question is, what kind of deals will VCs invest in? And knowing that the investment cycle is likely to take quite a long time, will the startups have sufficient cash buffer to last that long while terms are being negotiated? Now, if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, you will see that while investment pace has indeed come down, investors are still keen to invest in the early stages, provided there's MVP and some paying customers. And if we were to consider beyond investments, there's also the whole notion of M&A, where we will just become acquired and we can still continue to live out our dreams. So Trade Gecko was one of the more recent ones that is being acquired, but Cloud Cherry was acquired by Cisco and Red Dot Payment by PayU. So there are still activities around the M&A side of the house. Next. So in summary, I will not belabor the point of COVID, but what are some of the challenges brought about by COVID? SMEs struggled to exist. SMEs had to suddenly adapt to technological changes, and they had to adopt to work from home and adapt to managing teams remotely. But sadly, many have not learned nor have the ability to look into R&D as their next phase of growth. So next slide. So then, the question is, where are the opportunities for us in light of COVID? Next. So yes, Crunchbase has listed more than 60 of them. Some of these companies have raised sizable quantum of funds. We'll try to tickle your imagination and see what are the other opportunities. Next slide. We aspire to find the mavericks, which revolve around transforming the core and seeking breakout growth. Next, but we will look at them more specifically from 4 areas of human needs: daily living, food, shelter, as well as movement. Next slide. So during COVID, you'll realize that e-commerce businesses have been shooting through the roof, and it is obvious that health and wellness and delivery has gotten quite good traction. This is seen from those with green arrows. And is this therefore a space that only the big boys can play in? Is that true? Then if we were to look at the red arrows, for example, the apparel space, it reminds us that recently some of the fashion platforms had indeed faced difficulties and had to downsize. But for startups targeting the MZs, rather than fast fashion, which is a volume game and somewhat cheap or affordable, perhaps one could consider a more unique positioning, such as a day, which is more of a functional apparel. And given that we are all working from home, there's less need for wardrobe changes, and hence perhaps will be less willing to buy cheap clothes and more willing to consider functional, more expensive looking clothes. And then when you think about Gen Zs, they are cautious of their funds and they may therefore be less willing to spend on cosmetics, but they still love skincare. And now with COVID and all of us are constantly wearing masks the moment we step out of our homes or offices, we see that our skin is breaking out, and so it reinforces the need to have good skincare regime. So Drunk Elephant was founded in 2009, and we know what crisis that was during that time. But the founder has continued to grow the business because it's found a unique positioning, and the business was sold to Shiseido last year for $815 million. Now, is this a maverick company or is it one of a reinventor company? You take your pick. And when we look at finance, the Gen Zs, they have downloaded finance-related apps such as Robinhood, but the Gen Zs still like to talk to people, advisors, etc. Not so the millennials, they have apps and they like to talk to their apps directly. Hence, if we are looking at startups that touch on the finances, which is a necessity, then we will have to position slightly differently between the M's and the Z's. Next. So when we think about health, next slide please. When we think about healthcare, finance, work and education, they could be dominated by those who have raised a lot of money. But we should consider other subsectors. So for example, do you know that we should be expecting to see more babies made during COVID? Just think about it. How many of our friends are actually expecting babies right now? And we should expect to see the first COVID baby born around November, December timeframe. With borders still closed, where will the mummies find confinement help? These mums could be millennials, and what would they be concerned about in a post-COVID era for their children? And how do you think they will define or redefine community or toys for their children going forward? And if we were to think about it, being stuck at home is great. We see the birth of skills. We become chefs, we become cooks. But with COVID-19 also brought along casualties for people who have been working the front line or who have lost family members to COVID. A study done by Kaiser Family Foundation showed that 45% of the adults reported that their mental health was actually negatively impacted due to worry and stress over coronavirus. What could be done to address the mental distress, which is not unique only to Southeast Asia? And are there existing mental wellness apps that still have areas to refine and become better? And when we think about the gig economy, SMEs have been reducing employment. So where will these people be redeployed to? COVID brings about the inevitable adoption of the gig economy. So no longer is it just for the cool kids, it is also for people who are the Gen X as well as the boomers. And I've mentioned that people are the biggest assets in this time. The wave has started, and Philippines started to register about 2% of their population are involved in the gig economy. Will there be room for growth? And if we think about it, in terms of large recruitment firms, they are the Egon vendors, the Robert Walters. They came from other places. Do we think we can develop a gig platform that is founded and dominant in Southeast Asia? What will that look like? And in terms of cyber, SMEs are a big part of our ecosystem, but there's much hope for them to get onto the digital bandwagon. Many of them are not very familiar with the vulnerabilities of their IT system. So how can companies in the cybersecurity space or solutions provider reach out to these SMEs and ensure that their IT systems are well protected? Next. So COVID Next slide. Yes. COVID not only reveals vulnerabilities in supply chains, but also the need to have food security and for us to be in control of our food production. The category of alternatives to meat has raised lots of money. Last year it was about $800 million, and first quarter of this year the amount raised was $930 million. But we realized that meat cannot be grown the same way. The US had a meat shortage when 20 major slaughterhouses were closed because of COVID. So if we think about Southeast Asia, we have our fair share of plant and cell-based produce. How many of them, the logos that you see here, are you familiar with? For cell-based meat, regulations are still pending, and while this space requires sizable amounts of investment, all the players are kind of like all at the same starting line, as none of them have scaled big in a commercial way. So similarly, on the food production side, we have seen the emergence of high-tech farms, where the end goal is actually to produce sufficient green leafy vegetables with low manpower requirement and low cost. There is still much room to trim expenses, find effective and affordable energy solutions, so that high-tech, high-rise farms can become commercially viable. Then there's the D2c opportunities. When lockdown happened, you will notice brands like Volcanica. How do they reach their customers? They are a specialty or exotic gourmet coffee, and they profess that they were extremely busy shipping out coffee products during this COVID period. Why? Because nobody could buy from brick and mortar shops during the lockdown. Similarly, for our portfolio company, Licious, they had built a brand for themselves. And so when COVID happened, orders were flying off the web pages and they were busy fulfilling orders because people were weary about going to supermarkets. So if we were to take the coffee example further, considering the MZs, and 50% of them are coffee drinkers, their core values require stories of where the beans were grown, how they were brewed, how they were manufactured into powders, and whether or not to pair them or not with milk, etc. They love stories, they love Instagrammable pictures, they love accounts, and they love convenience. So this will definitely be another area that we can look at targeting our Gen Zs as well as millennials. Next. So when the lockdown happened, traditional restaurants and food courts were badly impacted. So what happened next was that food delivery businesses grew, some by 30% if not more. And cloud kitchens benefited because they were multi-branded. A research by Allied Market Research shows that cloud kitchens revenue can actually grow to about $72 billion by 2027. And cloud kitchens actually make use of common kitchen assets. Again, the availability of common assets, that of one location kitchens but multiple brands. However, not all prefer to have food from industrial kitchens, and some prefer to have home kitchens. So stories again and experiences of the chefs, the stories behind why they prepare the meals they prepare, will resonate well with MZs. So again, while such platforms seems to be pretty narrow, it teases out authenticity. And we can begin to start noticing a break away from the general marketplaces to something that's more dedicated and more focused. So likewise, if you were to stretch this beyond food and layer upon it accounts that are true and authentic, you will see that they can resonate very well with the MZs. Now, what about another opportunity for startups in the food and security space? We are privileged enough to have invested into Chetak, which provides managed services to the packaging industry. We love e-commerce and food delivery because it means more business for Chetak. But what Chetak has actually done was to transform a somewhat old school business model that of providing packaging solutions to one that is more high-tech and value-adding. So they demonstrated that they can be a maverick in an otherwise old and boring industry. So think about it, what are other traditional businesses that can be transformed with technology? Next. So when we think about co-working spaces and co-living spaces, they are certainly innovations, but that had also suffered because of COVID. However, I would say that they are bouncing back slowly but surely. People yearn for getaways. A long weekend at a hotel or Airbnb is actually a luxury for us in Singapore. We've got no other places to go. So while the disinfecting business and cleaners are already well provided for, where can startups find opportunities? Would it be to include virtual reality into experiences and you bring people to different lands? And perhaps to add in scent or smell into that virtual reality journey? Could that be the way for innovation? And then rather than expanding individual footprints, co-working spaces will likely adopt a code share model similar to that of the airline industry. This way, they can actually allow members, they can actually access other members and also allow their members to have more footprint in other places. And then with COVID, I've mentioned that people have more heart. And in Singapore, we have communities coming together to sew masks, distribute food, provide laptops for online learning. And space owners ought to reconsider their traditional revenue model, as businesses can operate from the largest asset class available, people's homes. And they will have the space owners will have to provide flexibility in terms of use of space and also revisit their rental models. So an example will be perhaps to craft out a space for the MZs to come alongside each other and design and create their own A-day type of functional apparel. So they will have to consider a new use of the spaces. Next. So Oliver Wyman has done a study on the effect of COVID, show that we actually would have found a new group of walkers. So where people are concerned with is actually in the carpool, ride share, and the public transport area. So to reduce the fear of catching the virus from public transport, we will need to do regular wipe down, much like what the New York Governor Cuomo requires of the New York Transit. However, this is very labor intensive as well as costly. How can one build a business to address the evergreen requirement for a public wipe down of public transport sectors? And how can this be rolled out to other modes of transport? I suspect the disinfectant business will be eventually built into our vehicles, much like the aircon. But anyway, for the walkers, what else can they do other than to listen to podcasts or watch K-drama while they're on the move? Are we able to have them notice things that are special or relevant to them? So from an otherwise routine walk, will it be jingles on the podcast that's relevant to the space they are walking in, or floating imageries around the K-dramas that come through their handphones? And if they are walking in hot, humid climate like Singapore, we will lose our glam. I certainly don't want to meet people and look like I'm sweating. So what kind of apparel can we look at that will allow us to look chic even after a 20-minute walk? Or are there shoes, jackets, or whatnot that can help walkers to obtain full body exercise during their journey without them looking like they have to dance around or sweat too much? What would that be? So these are certainly areas that we can look at for new business opportunities. Next. So to recap, ASEAN has many good forces supporting its reason to be an economic powerhouse. We just have to be resilient and pull through COVID and emerge stronger. And we have to bring our SMEs along so that no one is left behind. And as we seek innovative opportunities, may we focus on solving problems first, rather than merely striving to become a unicorn. Because if indeed we are serving a bigger need, we will get there, either on our own or, next slide, or we can get there. We just have to focus on solving a big problem, and then we will become a unicorn, either on our own rights, or if not, we can actually be, next slide. If not, then we can actually become part of other larger companies as they journey to become a billion-dollar club. But regardless, I just want to leave founders with this quote that I've lifted from ARK Invest. Survivors must be scrappy, lean, agile underdogs that know how to manage through fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So that wraps up my presentation for today. I hope it has been useful for you all. Thank you.
Hey, I think, Carmen, there was a small delay, so that was the reason why whenever you requested for a next slide, it was a little thing. But I think there was so much of information, and I was actually taking screenshots saying, hey, this is a very interesting stat, and I was just passing it to the team as well. So I think we have like about 2 to 3 minutes where can we try taking questions maybe. So I think, Carmen, you also mentioned that the slides will be uploaded from the Vertex Ventures slide share. So if you felt the slides were blurred, maybe because of the way it was transmitted, just go to the Vertex Ventures LinkedIn or slide share, or where would it be uploaded, Carmen?
Yeah, so it will be uploaded. We will actually be posting it on our LinkedIn,
Okay.
and also we'll make it available on our website as well. Yeah.
Sure. And I think we'll also be publishing the recording just in case if it turned out to be a little blurred. They will have the copy of the deck as well. So I think
Yes.
hopefully, yeah. If you have any questions, feel free to key it in, and we're happy to pick them up. And Carmen, what's the best way to reach out to you on LinkedIn, or what would be a good platform?
Yep. LinkedIn is a good place to reach out to me. If
Yeah.
not, you can always drop me an email at communications@vertexholdings.com.
Okay.
It's fine. Yeah, and
Awesome.
again, I apologize for our technical glitch. It would have been more smooth, and thanks a lot, Nivas, for helping me to transit all the slides.
Yeah, no. In fact, there were a couple of people who were pinging my teammates who were joking, saying the next slide is the is. I mean, they're how they're going to refer to me, but yeah. Uh, Carmen, just one question that I actually had, right? Like because one of the things that we function out of India, and are like when probably a startup from India has to expand to another state, right? It's probably the same. Not too many regulation changes, not too many permission changes to kind of open it out to a new state, because then also it's a large land by itself. But when you with respect to Southeast Asia, because it's spread across and it's also split by sea, how do you see that as a pro versus as well as a con? Like what do you think startups should be aware of and be wary of?
Yeah, it's actually a very good question. Highly relevant to Southeast Asia because we are a complicating setup. We have got lots of people, but we're highly complicating. The moment you cross from Singapore, you drive 45 minutes, you're in a different country. You move to
Yeah.
southwest, within half an hour, you're in a different country, right? But so this is where it's so important to network with locals. And I feel that the Singapore government actually has done the right thing many years ago, and that is to offer Asean Scholarship. So actually, Singapore is a melting pot because of the things that the predecessors have done. And even amongst Singapore, you will see many foreign students graduated from Singapore who are here as entrepreneurs. They are from Cambodia, they are from Vietnam, but eventually the home string will tug at them, right? So just like in India, you benefit from having a lot of Indian nationals returning from the US. And that's really such a strength for India. So similarly, I see that in Singapore, the foreign students, although they will become citizens in Singapore, they may become permanent residents in Singapore. There will come a time when they will want to see their own country get lifted up. So they will eventually want to go back to Singapore. And this is when that network has to be established. We don't know Vietnam as well as the locals. We can try to speak their language, but we are slightly different in terms of culture. How do we
True.
build those bridges with them, right? And have locals running the show.
Right. Well, that makes absolute sense because from a culture standpoint and from a language standpoint, it's so different between
Yeah.
us, and it's very united as well as there like very significant differences that you have to be aware of. So this is very interesting. Thank you so much, Carmen, for taking the time out to be doing this presentation. I think
Thank
we
you.
had a small glitch, but I think against all odds, we did get the presentation done. Thank you so much, Carmen. So looking forward to hopefully meeting you in person after all of this madness is over as well.
Sure. Yes. Look forward to that too.
Sure.
Thanks, Lanivas. Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks. Enjoy the rest of the show. Bye.
Yeah. Bye bye.